Today, I am live with Caleb Granger. He is the founder and president of Apex Regenerative, and you are listening to the Health Coach Nation podcast. I'm your host, Hailey Rowe. On this show, we cover marketing and sales tips for health coaches, life coaches, and mindset coaches. And we also touch a little bit on health if you're into that, because today, we have somebody who's a real expert on something called regenerative medicine. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. And I cannot wait to dig in. So welcome, Caleb. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Hailey. Excited to talk and share with your audience.
Yeah, likewise. So let's first talk about what do you do and what the heck is regenerative medicine?
Sure. Regenerative medicine is an exciting topic. It's the idea that you don't just try to tackle symptoms that continue to accelerate, get one symptom and you have more symptoms. We really try to get to the heart of the problem and solve the problem. And that's really kind of counterculture in the medical industrial complex, at least here in the US, that the current healthcare kind of regime is built around end stage care, meaning surgical intervention to do a destructive surgery that replaces or takes out something when you've gotten to the end of a condition, or treating it pharmacologically and essentially chasing symptoms without ever getting to the source problem. What regenerative medicine does is aim to solve and regenerate things that are degenerated, solve health problems at their core, just like we used to heal when we were kids. That was a function of having enough regenerative capacity in your body that your regenerative capacity could overcome the degeneration and infirmity and degeneration that you faced. As we age, that degenerative capacity drops. What we do is bring that regenerative capacity back up again so that your body can heal.
I love that. So how did you get involved in it? What led you down to this modality?
Sure. From a business perspective, I've been involved kind of in the end stage component of a lot of these diseases, which is the surgical side. So for 26 years in neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, and spine surgery. And in that capacity was involved in stem cells since about 2009, was involved in the production and manufacture and distribution of mesenchymal stem cells. Stem cells are the body's little healing factories. We naturally have millions of stem cells circulating in our body at all times. The number of stem cells that we have drops precipitously as we age. So when you're a kid, 15, 16 years old as a teenager, that's when your mesenchymal stem cells are the highest and they're the most potent in your body. You have about 200 million mesenchymal stem cells in your body when you're 15 or 16 years old. By the time you're my age, 50 years old, that number of MSCs, for short, mesenchymal stem cells, the number of MSCs you have in your body, so the healing factories that you have in your body to heal everything, that number drops down to about 50 million, 50. So from 200 million to 50 million, and then even less as you age further. Well, that's how your body heals, is through mesenchymal stem cells going and healing different tissues and organs, skin, all these things. What we've done since the 90s, we were able to take mesenchymal stem cells, isolate them, and transplant them. What we now know is those mesenchymal stem cells, when you put them in your body and try to add to the number of MSCs that you have, add to your regenerative capacity, all those cells die and are flushed by your body within 24 to 36 hours. In the time period that they're in your body, if there is any regeneration and healing that's done, that is done by secreting those MSCs, secreting these tiny particles called exosomes, EXOSOMES. Stem cell exosomes carry all the proteins, growth factors, and regenerative signals that the stem cell produces. Exosomes are how cells communicate with each other. So the healing and regeneration is done by the exosomes that the stem cells secrete. What we can now do is isolate just the exosome, just the healing signals, leave the cell, just take the healing signals, and be able to administer through a variety of ways massive amounts of pure healing signals. And so your body can take those in. When exosomes get into your body, they seek out any deficit from perfect and start repairing that deficit. And it's just a matter of how many exosomes over what period of time. And studies are showing there's tens of thousands of studies now in the last 5 years alone showing stem cell exosomes heal essentially any degenerated tissue, organ, ligament, tendon, etc. in the body, given enough time and a high enough concentration of exosomes.
Wow. So, what made you transition from doing surgery to focusing on this? How did you get started in this and all of that?
Sure. It was really, I mentioned getting involved in stem cells in the late 2000s, 2009, 2010. In the surgical setting, stem cell based products had this incredible increase around that time period. They came out, and the idea was, hey, you'd put these stem cells in and they would regenerate. They'd regenerate bone, where you needed bone, etc. What we found was over the next 6 or 7 years was what we now know is that it doesn't work. That stem cells all are killed by the body. Your body does an incredible job of isolating and keeping you safe from what it thinks is a foreign substance that's entered your body. And that's how it sees cells, even your own cells. You can take your own cells, process them, and put them back into you. Your body kills those cells too, very efficiently. And so it was really from going in that direction, doing thousands of patients, treating thousands of patients with stem cells, and seeing how poorly those therapies did. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, science now understands that the way stem cells work, when they do work, is by secreting exosomes. And so it's really a matter of the technology being able to isolate exosomes, a totally cell-free, acellular, non-inflammatory. Exosomes don't have cells. They don't carry genetic material like cells do. So you can't transfer genetic material from a donor to a recipient like cells can via exosomes. Exosomes also have an extremely low ability to carry viral and bacterial load. Unlike cells, cells can carry viral and bacterial load. So they're safer, they're significantly more concentrated in their generative power, and you can do a whole lot more of them per administration. So they kind of answered, it was, having 10 years of experience of trying and kind of failing with mesenchymal stem cells and seeing, hey, technologically, there's now the ability to just get essentially stem cell concentrate, the good stuff from the stem cells and none of the bad. That technologically made itself available. And then seeing how well just using that stem cell concentrate worked and how safe it was and how consistently with any essentially inflammatory or degenerative condition, if you treat that with stem cell exosomes, we're getting incredible results. We're about 14,000 patients, more than 14,000 patients in the last 3 years. And there's hundreds of thousands of patients in the peer-reviewed literature using stem cell exosomes as a therapy for essentially every degenerative and inflammatory condition known to humanity. So it's super exciting. It's basically all the stem cell literature and experience and research is actually stem cell exosome literature and experience,
Okay.
because we now know this is how stem cells work.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't in any way negate all of the good that we understand about stem cells. It's exactly that. We just now know that was all being done by the secretion of stem cell exosomes. And so there's a whole separate now kind of clinical and research focus on just stem cell exosomes, right, as a therapy that is approximately 45,000 studies in the last 4 or 5 years just on stem cell exosomes, in addition to hundreds of thousands of studies on stem cells and their safety and therapeutic efficacy over the last 20 years.
Okay. So if a health coach was listening to this and they were like, I may want to use this as a modality with my clients and
Mhm.
first I want to try it out myself or kind of learn more about it, how would they go about starting their own journey with this?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways. There's a handful of ways that stem cell exosomes are administered in humans. The most effective and most powerful is through an IV push. And so, of course, that takes a practitioner. It takes, you've got to, work through, have an intake and be seen by a medical professional. And then a practitioner to actually do it, right? To carry out the mechanics of doing the IV. But just so your listeners know, that's the most powerful. And so for our protocols, degenerative and inflammatory protocols, autoimmune, osteoarthritis, long COVID, vaccine injury, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, really, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, every degenerative and inflammatory condition is being treated with this because it takes away inflammation and it heals degeneration. The foundation of many of those chronic protocols is multiple IV pushes. That gets the most amount as quickly as possible. A second pillar of those protocols is sublingual or intranasal delivery daily from home. And so we have a sublingual spray that goes under the tongue, 5 sprays on the tongue, morning and night, that delivers 10 billion stem cell exosomes daily into the bloodstream in a really effective, really easy way. That's something that would be available to health coaches and is an incredible, profound, super powerful anti-inflammatory and regenerative protocol by itself. Just getting, that's about 10 to 20 million stem cells worth of healing, 0-day-old umbilical mesenchymal stem cells worth of healing. So super generative cells, super healing cells, and the signals from those cells, you're getting that every day into your bloodstream. Of course, that's going to be very generative and very healing. So that's one way. Intranasal delivery is another way. We do intranasal delivery when there's brain-based or skull-based conditions, or olfactory systems, so any sinus, sinusitis and these sorts of things. But brain-based like depression, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, post-stroke recovery. Everything that I'm mentioning and everything that I'll mention throughout this podcast has reams of peer-reviewed clinical studies showing its use. So that's one thing that is really, really unique about stem cell exosomes is the massive amount. There is not a single therapy in medicine of any kind that has more clinical and preclinical research in the published literature than mesenchymal stem cells and mesenchymal stem cell exosomes. There's not one of any kind, not aspirin, not insulin, not any surgery, not chemotherapy. There is no medical intervention that comes close to the level of peer-reviewed published research on that topic, essentially regenerative biologics. And so that's valuable also, I think, for your listeners to know, even though not many people have heard the word exosomes, stem cell exosomes, it is massively published. It is massively validated in the peer-reviewed literature, even though they haven't heard of it. It is the most of any intervention.
Nice. Yeah. So some of the clients who I work with, they have certain certifications and parameters that they may have to stay within.
Mhm.
But how could they start to recommend this to their clients? And what kind of things do they need to take into account, either as to say as a disclaimer or to get started with mentioning this to their clients? What would you suggest for them?
Yeah, so I would suggest that they reach out to us directly because absolutely that can be done. We have, from a legal perspective, from a protocol perspective, we have all of those things templated. So I'm sure you'll include our socials on every social. We're Apex Regenerative, at Apex Regenerative. theapexmedical.com is our website. And so please do reach out to us on that. But absolutely, that can be done. It's a great way. So typically, these are done in 5-week or 10-week protocols where you're getting daily sublingual or intranasal. Intranasal, if you have a brain-based inflammatory or degenerative condition. Sublingual, if it's just systemic inflammation or degeneration. That's the easiest, most effective systemic administration that you can do from home. And then we're able to distribute that, get that directly to the patient, and just super easy, super efficient, and also super helpful in healing.
Okay. And did they need to have, so in order to do your program or to take these, do they need like an expert they work with, like a practitioner, or through your website, or can they go and buy it and just try it
Yeah,
themselves?
so we do that through our provider MDs as a patient intake, and so that's something that for sure has to be done per patient, and
Okay.
we're able to do that.
Awesome. Okay. And what would you say are some of the myths or kind of misconceptions people have about, I mean, aside from people thinking, oh, I've never heard of this, and you
Sure.
said there's so many clinical, research. What else are some things people maybe get wrong or myths they should be aware of?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is a lot of people have at least heard about stem cells, right? It's like my grandmother knows about stem cells or thinks she does, right? That stem cells, hey, you can get stem cells, you can get a stem cell injection, that they're this healing therapy. And so I think that's one thing is, and then many of us know people who have had a stem cell treatment and maybe they got a result, maybe they didn't get a good result. Maybe they got a result for a short period of time and maybe they didn't. Well, while they are related, certainly, right? Stem cell exosomes, you can't have stem cell exosomes without stem cells. You also, a stem cell won't heal without secreting stem cell exosomes. So you can't have healing with stem cells if you have no exosomes. You can have massive healing with stem cell exosomes and no stem cells, which is what we do. So that when people understand that if they're getting a stem cell therapy, the only reason that's working is if those stem cells secrete exosomes while they're in the body for the short period of time that they're in the body, right? That's the process. When people understand that and understand that we take the most generative cells that the body ever produces, which are 0 day old placental and umbilical mesenchymal stem cells, after a healthy full-term delivered pregnancy, US only, rigorously tested, sourced from FDA and American Association of Tissue Bank, audited and accredited sources. It's massively regulated. And that's why you don't hear about people getting infections and these sort of things from tissue transfer. Even less, even if we didn't do those things, the mechanism of exosomes is such that it's really difficult for exosomes to carry, they can't carry genetic material, and it's really difficult for them to carry bacterial and viral load. So even if we didn't do those things that are required and that are audited by the FDA and AATB, even if we didn't do that, they would be incredibly safe. With those requirements, very rigorous, 300 plus disease states that are tested for, incredibly restrictive, even lifestyle exclusion criteria. For instance, a mother donating her placental material can't have one tattoo because there's a potential risk of needle stick, infection. And they look at that and say, hey, this is we're going to make a moral judgment on lifestyle choice. If you have one tattoo, well, lots of people have tattoos. That excludes a lot of donors. But it's that level of rigor that ensures safety in addition to just the mechanism of the exosome itself. So I think people conflating stem cells and exosomes. And then beyond that, I think people who are interested in something like this are usually interested also in peptides. That's kind of a hot topic. And so people saying, oh, okay, well, this is anti-inflammatory and this is healing, tissue healing. Well, okay, what about BPC 157? Which is this peptide that's very popular. It's been around since the 60s, and we know what it does. It does have kind of this single lane, single signal potential healing component. Well, that is like BPC 157. The analogy I like to use is that's like somebody on stage at the Hollywood Bowl playing the triangle, right? The triangle, the instrument, playing the triangle, ding, 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 ding. That's BPC 157. Exosomes are an entire orchestra, right? It is thousands of signals, thousands of proteins, growth factors, and regenerative signals. Peptides are one signal. So yes, there's signal. Yes, the triangle is important, like, right? It's important. Maybe there's a place for it in the symphonic composition, but it's nowhere close to the effect of having the full orchestra all orchestrating and defining healing the way your body naturally communicates healing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. So it's this is more comprehensive, and it also is something where you can use it for many different inflammatory things.
That's right.
And I'm curious too, because you're a business owner, you're a president of this company. What kind of being in this field where there's a lot of trends, there's a lot of misinformation, what kind of things have helped you get your message out effectively and, communicate it in a clear way?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people listening here might feel like, oh, I want to communicate this kind of stuff, but it's so sciencey and people don't get it and people are just running to other things. So, like, what advice would you give to somebody who's listening and like they want to communicate better something complex like this, but they're struggling to do that?
Sure. Well, listen, my ability to communicate the complex simply is to be determined, right? It's like we'll see how well people take to this, but I think just aiming to do that, right? Aiming to make it as simple as possible. We talk about always it's stem cell exosomes. If you talk about just exosomes, well, no one's even heard that word. When I first heard the word 4 years ago, I thought, in my mind, that could have been like Neutrogena or like some marketing word, like as far as I'm concerned, right? Exosomes. No, it is a biological particle called an exosome, tiny nanoparticle that is secreted from the stem cell. And so calling them stem cell exosomes, people think they know what stem cells are. They have at least an idea, 90% of the public. So making sure that it's being discussed as exactly what it is, a stem cell exosome, talking about how this is how stem cells heal. Stem cells heal. Here's how they heal: through secreting their exosomes, their tiny particles filled with all the proteins, growth factors, and regenerative signals that whatever the cell that was their source, whatever that cell produces, is carried by the exosome and communicated to other cells. That's another thing, is that all cells, uh, when people look up exosomes, one of the AI prompts, like the Google AI prompts, is the dark side of exosomes, right? And so, of course, everyone wants to click on that. Makes sense. When you go to that, you find that exosomes play a role in cancer proliferation. Well, the role they play is that cancer cells produce cancer cell exosomes. Exosome is just the name for the particle of how cells communicate. This is the method by which cells communicate, whether it's a cancer cell, leukemia cell, a therapeutic mesenchymal stem cell that is generative in nature, right? Those produce generative, healing, therapeutic mesenchymal stem cell exosomes. A cancer cell produces cancer cell exosomes. And so, you certainly don't want to increase, you don't want to add cancer cell exosomes, right? That would not be good. That's how cancer communicates. In fact, there have been studies that show exosomes, mesenchymal stem cell exosomes, having a dampening, cancer cell killing, and new cancer cell blocking effect on cancer. And so there's a growing body of literature showing exosomes as a index therapy to treat cancer. It's certainly being used to treat the bodily wasting effects of chemo, and being used in tissue regeneration and nerve regeneration, vascular regeneration for conditions downstream of cancer. Those are already in the literature. There's hundreds of studies of therapeutic mesenchymal stem cell exosomes being used for those conditions. But now this last year, it's also being used exactly to treat cancer itself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
So, what about since you are a wellness business owner, what kind of things are working for you right now as far as getting your message out, getting more sales? I'm just curious kind of what's
sure,
working for you.
sure. So we have a direct sales force nationwide. Obviously that helps. We're also active on social media, and of course, that can be it's a two-edged sword, but that's been really valuable. And in that area, as much as we can be, like you said, simple, I talk to people, multiple people every day, providers, all different types of providers. And so I know what the objections are. I know what people's perceptions are, usually based on their training, based on the types of patients that they see, their patient population. And so when I'm translating that into, for instance, social media and trying to be educational, I'll just take, hey, I see 80% of people having this misconception, you know, like the example of the triangle versus the full orchestra. Well, that was based on people thinking somehow that BPC 157 would have a similar effect on the body to 100 billion stem cell exosomes. It's like, well, that's not even close. It's not even, you're not even in the same category of effect that you'll have on the body. And so speaking to that very efficiently in a visual way, right, trying to make a visual comparison, um, I've found that to be effective.
Yeah, definitely. The analogies and breaking it down and listening to your audience about what FAQs, what
Mhm.
objections, and
Yeah,
using that.
many people think this, the reality is this, right?
Yeah.
That's a great
hmm
format.
For sure. And, one of the things that I've heard about peptides is you take them and then you cycle off of them for a little bit. Is
Mhm.
it similar with something like this?
Yeah, so it's actually not. And that's a great point. With peptides, with pharmacological intervention of any kind, really what we're used to as Americans in the healthcare network that we have in our healthcare system is that idea that you take something that works in one signaling lane and it either increases or suppresses one area, right? One receptor. You take a bunch of caffeine, you drink a bunch of coffee, and you'll be wired. But if you keep drinking 8 cups of coffee every day, very quickly your body will adjust to that and will normalize that caffeine intake. And it will normalize it by dampening some other area of production, of natural production in your body. Testosterone is the same way. Guys 40 years and older, their natural production of testosterone drops. So they take exogenous testosterone. Well, what happens when you already have a low amount of testosterone being produced and now you flood your body with more testosterone? Well, even the little bit that you have will totally shut off, right? That's what happens with exogenous anything, including peptides. With stem cell exosomes, that's the opposite of what happens. With stem cell exosomes, you're increasing your gross regenerative capacity in your body. I mentioned having 200 million very potent stem cells circulating in your body when you're a kid. When you're a kid, if you break your arm and you've got 200 million stem cells, those stem cells all go to heal, and you literally come back with an arm that's healed and is stronger than before you broke it, right? That's a testament to your regenerative capacity overwhelming your acute environmental and genetic degeneration that your body's facing. As those ratios change as we age, our gross regenerative capacity falls precipitously, and the degeneration we face rises. And as a result, when you hurt yourself, if you're 50 years old, you hurt yourself, you now have an ongoing pain, some ongoing orthopedic thing that is now, yeah, I hurt myself 7 years ago, and that's why I still limp now, or that's why I can't run now, right? Your regenerative capacity doesn't overwhelm degeneration anymore. What we do is we rebuild that regenerative capacity until your regeneration once again outstrips your degeneration. When that happens, you rebuild actual tissue. We have studies showing in osteoarthritic, degenerated bone on bone hips and knees, 1.2 millimeters average new cartilage within 6 months in knees, a little more than a 1.3 millimeters new cartilage in osteoarthritic degenerated hips. It regrows cartilage. Well, when you stop taking, you do this incredible regenerative inferno, build up the capacity. That capacity allows healing to happen instead of continued degeneration. When the healing happens, you actually are rebuilding tissue. That 1.2 millimeters of new cartilage doesn't suddenly disintegrate, when you stop taking exosomes. It's there. Will it degenerate? Will it be loaded? Yeah, of course. But it's not some uh, receptor that's been artificially opened or dampened. And once you take away that stimulus of the exosomes, now it goes back and catapults below, where it was before. It's not like that at all. You take exosomes, you heal to the amount that you're going to heal, and now you have a new health baseline that you're
Mm.
operating from.
Gotcha. Okay. So I want to give people an option to connect with you and learn more about this. But before we do, I do just have to add the disclaimer that the information on this show is not meant to treat or diagnose any disease or condition. And always talk to your doctor before starting any new therapy modality, any new supplements, anything like that. So this is not medical advice. All right. So where can people connect with you, Caleb, if they want to learn more about what we talked about today?
Sure. Our website is theapexmedical.com. And then on every social, TikTok, Facebook, IG, we are at Apex Regenerative.
Awesome. Awesome. And for those of you who are listening who want the free gift of the day, it is my free message mastery cheat sheet and class where you can get clear on your niche, how to communicate your message in elevator pitch. And that is available at HaileyRowe.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.